Welcome to F4 Podcasts. With me is Christopher Rupashell. He's a Republican who spent over 11 years on Capitol Hill. He worked in the Pentagon. He is a DC rat. And today we are going to talk about fat cats. The Capitol Hill rat. We'll talk about fat cats. And we are going to...
Sounds like I'm the one going to get slaughtered.
Hey, baby. We are going to be making sense of the new Trumponomics starting 2025. So, Christopher, we've heard of Bidenomics. What is Trumponomics?
So much of Trump's first term was spent really with traditional Republican views. You had the tax cuts that were largely former Speaker Paul Ryan's baby for a decade. We're seeing slightly more opportunistic Trump this time around. He tried the threat of tariffs before. He liked that. He seemed to get the response he wanted without having to impose them. But most of the time, we're talking about deregulation, lower taxes, sort of a standard Republican playbook.
Well, that is true, but Donald Trump has changed the free trading Republican Party completely. Post-World War II, the U.S. embraced free trade, and Donald Trump has decisively changed American foreign policy, or rather American economic policy, in his first term. So, in what ways is he different to, say, Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush or the Republicans who came before him?
Sure. So there's the rhetoric part of it, and there's what he really does. Indeed, in his first administration, he killed the Trans-Pacific Partnership right off the bat. He renegotiated NAFTA. But a lot of this is using the threat of tariffs or reducing free trade to gain in other areas. For example, just recently, he's talked about tariffs 25% on Canada and Mexico to reduce the flow of immigrants and to address fentanyl, which has really nothing to do with economics. I mean, it has little to do with economics. So in the past, he used this same playbook with Mexico to threaten tariffs unless he got some help at the southern border. He received that. The threat went away of tariffs.
But let me interject. TPP, you've already referred to Trans-Pacific Partnership. Jettisoning it has hurt American allies, shaken faith in U.S. consistency. And and I know Japanese friends and friends in Asia who are still deeply traumatized and indeed concerned about a repeat of such measures.
Well, and if they're going by his rhetoric right now,
it's the reality. TPP was very much chewed out. It was for Asia, it was catastrophic.
But talking about moving forward, if they're listening to the rhetoric of the threats of tariffs, I'd be deeply concerned. But, if personnel is policy, and I suppose we can get into this, there's reason to believe that his policies will not be
as extreme as his rhetoric.
Yes.
So that brings me on to my next question. Are we going to see more of the same in the second term?
In terms of his policies and the sort of people he had? So
let me lay out the Japanese concern. The Japanese worked very hard with the Americans to negotiate the TPP, make it a reality. Mm-hmm. And one fine day, the US threw it out of the window. Does the WTO go out of the window too now?
So they be a bridge too far even for Trump. But
hang on a minute. There's a serious element to it because the appellate body in the WTO has effectively been kneecapped by the Americans, which greatly limits the efficacy of the WTO.
Sure.
The concerns of our Japanese friends are not fictional. They are real.
No, I don't think they are fictional. I think if they think that Trump could impose greater tariffs, I think they're exactly right. The question is, on whom and why? I'm not entirely convinced that we're going to look at mass tariffs. Now, bear in mind, when Trump ran, the first time around. One of the planks in his platform was that, rightly or wrongly, American workers are getting screwed. Americans are getting screwed. We're paying too much. We're losing our jobs. So I don't know that anybody should have been that surprised that he followed through.
Well, he isn't the first person. As early as 1992, Ross Perot talked about the giant sucking sound.
Yeah.
And jobs.
Yeah, unfortunately, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
You're old enough.
I am old enough.
So he's echoing a strain in American politics, which has been concerned about jobs leaving the U.S. And indeed, after World War II, America has seen relative decline, partly because, let's be honest, the end of World War II was an aberration. Japan had been bombed out. Germany had been bombed out. Western Europe was in ruins. Soviet Union had suffered millions of casualties. And besides, its economic system was crap. So the reality is that America was the only man left standing.
Right.
Obviously, it couldn't dominate to the same degree forever. But the China shock did take jobs away from Ohio to, say, Guangdong, or for that matter, from Pennsylvania to perhaps Mexico. So that, I rephrase, that was probably the Mexico shock, NAFTA.
Yeah.
But the point is the China shock took millions of jobs away from American shores to China.
Sure.
And therefore the economics paper on it.
I think there's a generational trauma in America. I think people...
The Rust Belt.
The Rust Belt, yes. And the idea that either through, tariffs or sort of indulgences from D.C., subsidies, that we can somehow rebuild those jobs it deeply resonates. And I think it's something that helped propel Trump into the White House, not only the first time, but also the second.
I see. So there is real risk of tariffs, although you think the bark may be worse than the bite. And as you said, if we talk about personnel, if personnel are policy, then perhaps we do not have that much to worry about. So who are the key personnel? Who are the key players in this new Trump administration, and what are they like?
Well, I think the top two who come to mind in that field would be Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of Commerce. At Treasury, the current, and they're both nominees, of course, but the current nominee is Scott Bessent, and he has a pretty straightforward set of goals. He calls it his 3-3-3 plan. He wants America to increase its production of oil equivalent barrels by 3 million a year. He wants to increase GDP growth by 3%. And he wants U.S. deficits to stick to 3% as opposed to, I believe, they're right around 6% right now.
Just correction. He wants the U.S. to achieve GDP growth of 3%, and not increase it by 3%.
Yes, the growth. Yes,
yeah, exactly. So good. So the rule of three, he could have almost debated for Oxford.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know. Remember, 3-3-3 years ago, we had a presidential candidate who had 9-9-9. They like these rules.
Excellent. So walk us through others. So this chap, he wants to do this 3-3-3 agenda, which basically means deregulation, more oil and gas, so that lowers the cost of energy, where the U.S. has a huge advantage over others.
He's also in favor of retaining the tax cuts. The Congress is going to have to address that issue again. It's called reconciliation. Basically, that concludes the next year or two. He wants to keep taxes low, but he is a deficit hawk, as I mentioned. And he is not a heavy tariff guy. Now, some of his rhetoric, say, I believe January of this year, he was telling clients that, you want to keep the tariff gun on the table, but it will rarely be used. He has subsequently written articles where he seems to become a bit more of a Trump MAGA tariff acolyte, but not to the extent that the sort of
MAGA, for those of our international listeners, is Make America Great Again.
Yes. The refrain from the Trump motto. But the runner-up to that position is Robert Lighthizer, and he was a very, very strong tariff guy. He was the trade ambassador for the U.S.
Wasn't he in running for U.S. Trade Representative and not Treasury Secretary, or was he in running for both?
No one's going to, speak publicly about it, but he was in the running for Treasury. And right now he hasn't been nominated for anything. And he was the first term U.S. trade ambassador, longtime China skeptic, but he was a hard line pro-tariff guy. So, that you got Bassett instead of Lighthizer, that may make you think, well, maybe the tariffs won't be as bad. Another fellow, Peter Navarro, has yet to land. He's being considered theoretically for a senior position. He held a couple positions within the first Trump administration. He's a strong tariff guy. When you go over to commerce, you have Howard Lutnick, and he is more along the lines of what the Secretary of Treasury nominee feels, that tariffs are a negotiating tool as opposed to a hard line. Tariffs are good in of themselves.
I see. So they are not as hardline as Donald Trump, but they subscribe to his view that you should use coercion where you can, but you should bully wherever you are. So you should pay your contractors fair, and they'll settle for 60-70% less.
Your words, not mine, buddy. I get where you're going. Yeah. Well, I guess to use now my words, the people who worry about tariffs could have done much, much worse.
Okay, you're saying, look, you've only got syphilis. It could have been HIV.
I think so.
Excellent. Very good. So these are the key players in the incoming administration. And there's, of course, the famous Elon Musk, who apparently has Donald Trump's ear as of now, although there are people taking out bets that the two will soon fall out.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But as of now, Elon Musk is certainly not a tariff guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, bear in mind his remit, and it's still a bit gauzy, is that he wants to reduce government inefficiency.
DOGE,
which is a play on
of government efficiency.
Yes, which is a play on the
his coin.
This coin,
yeah. And he's got a wonderful partner in crime, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yes. And they are, shall we say, a bit ambitious in what they want to cut from government. Most people think that without, to get to where they want, you would have to make some enormous cuts to entitlements, to means-tested benefits. And if you want to eliminate the number of government employees you're talking about, most people don't think that is remotely feasible.
I see.
And that they'll, to raise the kind of revenue they would like to raise. I don't see that is possible.
I see. So there are a lot of competing voices then in the administration.
Always are.
Yeah, and always have been. But it is also well known that Donald Trump listens to the last person who has his ear.
Yes. However, I think this time when Donald Trump came to D.C. the first time, and he's spoken about this, he didn't know D.C. as well. He got he would say a bunch of bad votes, right?
I see.
And
he was a virgin and fell for the big football boy.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes. Or maybe he was the football boy and he fell for the cheerleader. I think he'd prefer that analogy. So he would claim that some of his staff weren't the greatest. He would probably use more colorful language than that. I think you're going to have a more loyal staff. I think loyal is the word the Trump crowd would use, who are less likely to attempt to persuade him in a different direction. I think you'll.
So when he says jump, they will say how high.
I think you'll have more of those in this administration.
Excellent. So the administration will carry out his wishes, and he, of course, believes, if we follow his interviews, not just during the political campaigns, but before, that America has been screwed by its foreign trading partners. Once upon a time, he would bash Japan. Then he did control fine and replaced Japan with China in all of his rhetoric.
Yeah.
And
the Biden administration carried that forward and expanded on it.
Exactly. And so he's been a historic president in the sense he certainly changed tack on China, something very different to George Bush Sr. And Bill Clinton. And so that is all true. And the administration will do his bidding. But is Donald Trump overstepping when it comes to tariffs? Will the courts and the House of Representatives rein him in?
Yes, there is, I can't remember the specific law that allows him to, but there are circumstances under which the president can unilaterally impose tariffs. But I believe the rationale has to be fairly specific, not just because I want to. These tariffs would face a lot of court challenges. You may recall in Trump's first term, he had some challenges. He did not win them all.
But now the Supreme Court is very loyal to him.
Dude, I'll use nice words. That's a bunch of rubbish.
Okay, well, if you say so.
I don't think that the Supreme Court will roll over. I think that you will have a variety of challenges. I think those challenges will be filed in friendly jurisdictions for those who oppose.
Excellent. So the Supreme Court will not roll over, but it'll purr and not bare its teeth.
You know, I don't have the numbers at hand, but the number of opinions that fall strictly along the quote unquote partisan lines are quite few.
I see.
Most of the time, there is a majority that consists of people from both sides, and not always the same characters you would assume.
I see. And so the court will go along with Trump and the bipartisan consensus. Screw China.
I don't think there's a lot of love in America right now for China and China's mercantilist policies, its export policies, the trade imbalance. And another thing to keep in mind, Trump is probably still angry over the deal he negotiated with China required China to dramatically, or at least substantially, increase its import of American goods. And China didn't. So I think there is a sort of loss of faith there in negotiating with China.
They did what he usually does in negotiations, short shakes.
I remember talking to some Trump folks who did those negotiations, and they'd say, you negotiate all day and you negotiate. And then as soon as you think you have a deal, they come back the next day and they've interpreted it in all kinds of different ways that aren't in keeping with what the deal was the day before. So I think there is a weariness within Trump land that negotiating with China will do anything. I think there will be more of a brute force approach.
I see. Now, you've just said China will be a loser in the Trump administration. Of course, China has been a loser even in the Biden administration. Joe Biden cut China off from semiconductor chips. Joe Biden has launched a full-scale industrial policy to compete with China. And Joe Biden has continued the tariffs and indeed strengthened them and worsened them as far as China is concerned. So we know China is on the losing side, but who will be the other losers and perhaps some winners of Trump 2.2?
Well, let's just stick with China. Some of the losers could be Americans because China will almost certainly retaliate. In the past, they have selected products from specific districts that are either swing districts or loyal Republican districts. So this isn't a free ride for Trump and the incoming administration. Just impose tariffs. China takes it, lying down and prize uncle at the end of the day.
I thought the China man would just roll over as in the 19th century. After all, go back to the good old days when the populists banned Chinese immigration because they were undercutting Irish wages when the railroads were being built. I thought this time you'd do it again.
I don't think that's where this is going. One of the things people go to are rare earths, where China has a real stranglehold. Now, what Trump could do is reverse some of the mining policies that America's had, and particularly under Biden. You can, open up, rare earth mining operations.
So it could be drill, baby drill, and not just for oil.
Well, it will be. I think you'll have mining and oil. In the past, and I can't remember the name of the company, but we have subsidized and had rare earth drilling when China would raise the prices, spike the prices. And then when they let them fall back down, that company would go bust. So I don't know if there'll be a greater commitment to independence in some of those vulnerable areas.
So some of the losers you said could be Americans. Let's say if you're the CEO of Boeing and you were planning to salvage your fast sinking, or shall we say falling company by selling a few planes to China.
Oh, right.
And now you'd be having palpitations.
Well, and also cheaper goods to America. There will be fewer Sheehan halls, as they say. So you will have to pay more for the goods that are produced somewhere else. You will have supply chain disruptions.
So the electric kettle we use to make our tea before this podcast began will suddenly become more expensive.
That's right. That's a nice kettle. It'll be even more than what you paid.
I see. And so will all the electronics we use, like cell phones, laptops, etc.
Yeah, and you have to make these things somewhere. I don't know if they'll be friend-shored or
near-shored.
Yes.
Yeah. Reshored, friend-shoring, near-shoring, reshoring, all these new terms that are coming into fashion. Once they were all offshore.
Yeah, that's right. What is old is new again.
What is old is new again, indeed. So, all right, American consumers could suffer. And indeed, American consumers were the big winners of globalization and the China shock, because the influx of hundreds of millions of Chinese workers into the global labor market pushed down prices. And yes, American workers suffered, but American consumers and American share owners or stockholders benefited. And now American consumers and indeed some American stockholders, owners, shareholders could suffer.
Yes, yeah. I mean, American auto manufacturing. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you what Trump's argument is here. He has said that
he has what?
He does. He has said that if you make the tariffs so obnoxious, so high, that it will force companies to come back.
And it'll make America great again.
Well, what this does is it resonates with the blue-collar workers who migrated into the Trump sphere.
From the Democratic Party to the Republican Party.
That's right. And as you may recall, even the Teamsters, they were always a reliable Democrat endorsement. They did not this go round. So the blue-collar workers and indeed union workers have gravitated toward Trump. And we won't get into it, but Trump's Secretary of Labor nominee, very, very labor friendly. So he has formed an unusual coalition. And certainly those people believe that Trump's economic policies of instituting or raising tariffs will redound to their benefit with higher wages, better jobs, whatever.
So American workers could benefit.
That is the Trump argument.
I see. So we've talked more domestically, but say you're the CEO of Toyota. What should you worry about?
I would worry that Trump actually, goes into a full trade war with everyone, everywhere, all at once. If that were to happen,
especially the Japanese, he never liked them anyway.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are a lot of people he doesn't like. Let's start there. There are a lot of people he dislikes more.
I see.
I also think that, yes, economic policy is an important, economic policy in some ways what brought Trump into office, because everyone was furious about immigration, inflation, and the economy writ large, wages really. But he has other fish to fry. He's going to have to worry about the upcoming tax cuts. He claims that he's going to take care of the Ukraine situation by the
24 hours.
24 hours. Okay.
After taking office.
Yes. He does have a less stable Middle East.
Indeed. And he's going to stabilize it because one of his in-laws, the one father-in-law of one of his daughters is Jewish, and he's going to negotiate with Israel. And the other father-in-law of another daughter is Lebanese Christian, and he's going to negotiate with Lebanon. And this extremely talented family is going to bring peace, and there'll be rivers of milk and honey in the Holy Land.
Solve it all overnight.
Indeed, it's family business.
He also had, he's got.
I have to say, I mean, his daughters have married well. Muslims and Arabs, all part of the same family.
That's right. That's right. For all the people who claim he's a bigot and a racist, I mean, his family's quite a melting pot.
At least his daughters have melted into the arms of strange men.
He still has to tame the public perception of inflation, maybe even inflation itself. He has more things to do. And of course, immigration, when he came into office last time, was not as bad as it is now. So that is an even more relevant and prominent concern.
So he has to build the wall.
Well, build the wall has become a symbol of reducing immigration inflows, just like tariffs are a symbol of bringing jobs back to America. Whether or not you build the wall, which limited portions of the wall were built, but the numbers of illegal immigrants declined. Whether or not it is actually a wall, people want to see the numbers of immigrants decline. They want to see their wages rise.
Yeah.
So
on that note,
it's almost a symbolic.
Yeah. On that note, I met someone who worked on the Trump campaign, and that person said that, look, both free trade and immigration are two sides of the same coin. When you have too much free trade, you depress wages of workers. When you have too much immigration, you depress wages of workers. So for us to raise wages of the American working class, we have to make sure that we limit the supply of workers, either abroad or coming inside into the US. And you may agree or disagree with that. It has a logic to it. However, what that argument or what that logic ignores is you will put inflationary pressure on the economy by both those methods. And then it is the American consumer and the average American who will be paying for the price rises as a result.
Understood. But from the perspective of a voter, they will say there are too many immigrants. Let's build a wall.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Also, there's allegations and indeed reality about crime and grime. Ultimately, no nation can keep open borders.
Right.
Not even...
Well, if you have no borders, you have no nation.
Yeah, not even South Africa is open to all other Africans.
Right. So my point is that Trump's political argument is what got him elected. I understand that, fancy Wharton School, big brain of yours, but these things resonated with voters. That's what they understand. That's what they're looking for in some form.
So the only immigrants Donald Trump would like are leggy hottie-totties from Eastern Europe.
Has one for life.
To improve the genetic quality of future generations of the U.S.
Yes.
And the rest...
Oh, Atul, tell me. Are you against that?
Well, I'm more open-minded. I wouldn't be averse to Japanese immigration either.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Anyway, here is a follow-up question. So if you're a CEO of Toyota and you've seen the light trucks banned in the past, you have to worry about tariffs. What about you are the CEO of Infosys in India or the CEO of Siemens in Germany? What do you have to worry about?
It's too hard of a bank shot for me to predict.
Got it.
If there is a tariff.
I'll tell you, the CEO of Infosys is already worried about BRICS plus nations facing sanctions. Trump has already said 100% tariffs. The EU has suffered in the past under Trump and indeed under Joe Biden because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So the EU fears that
because the Inflation Reduction Act was effectively a protectionist measure by just dumping a ton of it's the opposite, rather than tariff it, dump a whole bunch of money into the domestic industry.
Exactly. So, and of course, it had requirements for European companies to come here and produce, as we know from our visits to our German friends. Mm-hmm. In particular, an honorable mention goes out to Brigadier General Frank Grafer, indeed. And we met people there who were very concerned about it. And there's real concern that given the relative weakness in EU economies, look, the French government may collapse any minute if it hasn't collapsed already over the budget. They do not have a budget for 2025. The German government has collapsed. They also do not have a budget for 2025. Mm-hmm. France and Germany are the two beating hearts of the EU. And so at this time of enormous weakness, Trump being Trump, he could drive a very hard bargain and use the threat of tariffs very effectively against the EU.
He could. There is a slight plus for the Europeans. And that is if he wants to remove the quasi-ban on liquefied natural gas shipments, that could reduce the cost of energy in Europe.
And if he makes a deal with Russia and brings Russia back into the global energy market, that'll be good for European industry.
That could
especially German industry.
Absolutely. That could really lighten their load. So it's not all doom and gloom for them.
Understood. So the CEO of Siemens shouldn't commit suicide. He should go and just have some more Weiss beer.
No. Yes. But to go back to your point about BRICS, I don't think that, in India is not a Russia in this scenario, right? I mean, they get lumped into this whole BRICS category. But
Project 2025 has specifically pointed at India as a highly protectionist country with both tariff and non-tariff barriers. Trump himself has talked about Harley-Davidson. Sure. It is not that India not allowing Harley-Davidson into the market or having too high duties, and it's in a swing state. And of course, Mr. Elon Musk would like to sell more Teslas in India. So I'm not so sure that Trump won't use the stick of tariffs to extract concessions.
Oh, I think that is the point. Whether or not the tariff materializes for the purposes of negotiating, yes, that is the stick.
Got it. All right. So the CEO of Infosys should worry, basically.
I would worry. I would be more worried if you had a Robert Lighthizer or a Peter Navarro running the show.
Got it. It is a fever, not a cancer.
Right. If you had those two guys, I would say this is true believing tariffs are great. I think there is more of a negotiating pragmatist, stick and carrot thing going on here.
Oh.
And Trump's history shows that sometimes that's how he thinks about this.
A lot of hot air, and then you negotiate.
Well, yeah. I don't know if it's hot air. I think that he is.
It's just a realistic.
He might actually impose it. I don't think it's all bluff, but I don't think it's the worst of what some people were thinking it would be a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. So the CEOs of Infosys in India and Siemens in Germany should worry, but not too much. No point committing suicide yet.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
All right. So that brings me on to another question. So many different people and big personalities. Do you foresee infighting?
There's always going to be infighting in an administration, but you have a lot more like-minded people who are going to be selected for the top jobs than you had in the first Trump administration.
Which was famously chaotic, as we all know.
Famously chaotic. It may be chaotic again. But when Trump came to D.C., he selected a lot of well-known names and old hands. If you look at we've just talked about a few of them, but if you look at some of the other nominees, a lot of people are scratching their heads saying,
Robert Kennedy, RFK Jr.
Yeah. There are any number.
C. Gabbard.
Yeah. There are any number.
Rash Patel.
People are wondering if a lot of them will get through the Senate confirmation hearings And indeed, one has not made it. Former Congressman Gates. He dropped out for Attorney General.
Apparently, there were videos of him cavorting with minors by swimming pools doing the rounds.
Yeah, I don't know if there were videos, but there were firsthand accounts. So this is a very different crew from the crew he originally had in his first term.
And still, you've pointed out to the Senate not confirming some of the nominees. And we've discussed in the past how the House of Representatives hangs by a wafer's edge.
Yes.
And so Trump may not have his way in either of the two houses of the Congress or either of the two chambers of the Congress.
So Trump himself did not take a position on the next majority leader of the Senate. And his folks weren't a big fan of Senator Thune, who won out in that battle. Trump has asked to make recess appointments, which is basically a way to get a whole list of people through without going through the confirmation process.
So you send a list like Uncle Joe Stalin and it's soup.
A little bit like that, actually. The Senate seems to resist.
The Politburo sits, as in the death of Stalin, and votes unanimously.
By the way, we still have to watch this again. Yeah. So there are reasons to think that some of these nominees won't get through, but it's a very eclectic group of people.
Sure, but
you want to go to the House?
Let's go to the House because that's where you served, and that controls the purse as per the Constitution. That has the power of the budget. That has the power of raising taxes or slashing taxes.
Yes.
So the House, in some ways, is more important to Donald Trump's economic policy making than the Senate.
Yes. Yeah. The Senate still has to approve, but I get where you're going there. Yeah. I mean, with that razor thin margin, if you look, past his prologue, anytime the Republicans have a razor thin margin, it devolves into infighting. The Freedom Caucus.
You don't have a Nancy Pelosi to crack the whip?
Well, and that's right. And Pelosi did. And she got everyone in line.
Exactly.
Republicans are not very good at this.
Look, there were two attempts at hostile takeovers of two of the main American political parties. Bernie Sanders tried to take over the Democratic Party. He failed. And Donald Trump tried to take over the Republican Party. And he defenestrated none other than the storied Bush clan and various others. So clearly, the Republican Party today is far more fractious. And we saw the previous House dissolve into bitter acrimony, and it was all civil war. It wasn't really fighting with the Democrats.
Are you talking about the Speaker McCarthy's
house? Yeah.
Or just in general, because it was quite fractious in other respects.
Yes, both of them.
Yeah.
McCarthy's ouster, the first in American history, was a revelation.
Yeah. Personally, I mean, with all the years I've seen the House, when we have these kinds of majorities, you are going to have a group of hardliners that will press for their way or
Freedom
highway.
Caucus.
Freedom Caucus is a notorious one. We had years ago, there was a Tea Party faction, and oftentimes they end up cutting their noses to spite their faces. Even currently now, Speaker Johnson has frequently decided, you know what, I'm just going to have to go to the trough and get Democrat votes to pass the bill or whatever bill. And so then he has to give them something in return. So you don't really, believe it or not, there are still a few swing states. And if the Freedom Caucus wants the most hardline thing, the guy or gal who is in a swing state who caucuses with Republicans is still saying, you know what, I care about staying a congressman. I can't go along with this.
And every 2 years, the House is up for grabs. Every 2 years, you're facing an election. So you can't really risk getting too far ahead of public opinion because you will meet your comeuppance pretty quickly.
That's right. You will. As somebody said years ago, they bury the bodies warm up here.
A wonderful statement. So the House will turn out to be fractious. The House may see some amount of bipartisanship, and the House is where sausage will be made.
Yes. However, we're going to see in the Senate, you'll probably have a budget reconciliation bill. where you basically get to re-slice and dice. It's not the original purpose was to actually reduce spending, but reconciliation bills frequently take a previous year's budget and slice and dice it a different way so that you can reallocate the spending. So you might see some of that. You might see, I'm forgetting the name, drawing a blank, but there is a process by which you can overturn a previous administration's regulatory rulings. You'll probably see a number of those votes at the beginning of 2025. In general, you will probably see a pretty strong, assault on the regulatory state. You've got to keep in mind, add this to Trump's list. Trump has some grievances. Not all of them some of them I completely understand. So he has a real beef with any number of the bureaucratic bodies.
So do you.
So do I. Well, I don't like bureaucracy.
Excellent. So will we see you in the Trump administration?
I don't know. They're free to call me anytime.
Excellent. Well, those of you in the Trump administration who are listening to us, here's a handsome lad from Texas, has nice muscles, looks the part, and can speak somewhat sensibly. So you might have someone slightly more educated than Matt Gaetz, should he care to look. Now, there are two scenarios people lay out. Not too many, but two extreme scenarios. Balaji Vishwanath, a venture capitalist who's rather prolific on Twitter, talks about sonic boom of economic activity, growth, jobs, a great new golden age. Now that his buddies will be running policy, crypto will be back, waste will go down, a regulation will vanish as a forest fire sweeps through Washington. The swamp will be drained. We will all sing Kumbaya. So that's one end of the spectrum.
And I just want to add, you do realize the administrative state, the bureaucracy itself, will fight all of this.
Yeah, of course.
Tooth and nail.
Yeah, but now listen to the second scenario.
Okay.
Which the Democrats paint, especially from California, that Trump will unleash trade wars. Trump will renege on American commitments to U.S. allies and American buy-in, or rather American membership of international treaties. He will unleash inflation and higher interest rates, perhaps even a lower dollar, and an economic crisis.
Or a higher dollar.
Or a higher dollar, yeah. So my question is...
which of the two camps?
Which of the two camps?
No, they're mutually exclusive, right?
What do you belong to? Or are you, like the Buddha, taking the middle part?
I think both of them are fairly simplistic. Trump does have to worry about inflation. Now it's come down, but the memories are pretty raw. If we have a spike in inflation, that would be a very bad thing.
And the Israelis could strike Targ Island tonight as we are speaking.
At which point, I think the Trump administration would be supportive of the Israelis.
And inflation would be back in the picture. That would be out of the bag.
Yes, there are any number of things that can go wrong. Look, you talk about inflation. I hear, the media and others talk incessantly about how Trump's policies
are
inflationary, destroy jobs, all of this. Now, you know me, Atul, I'm not an economist, but what I do know is the economists were dead wrong about inflation before.
All of them, not our friend, Nasir Khilji.
No, Nasser was exactly right. But
They
didn't like what he had to say.
Yeah,
and they did their whatever they wanted anyway.
Got it. But remember, so don't tar all economists with the same brush, because one of our dear friends was very clear it would be inflationary, as were some other friends of mine. So let's say the Ivy League economists who wanted posh jobs in the Treasury and the Federal Reserve conveniently sang like medieval heralds, praising their lords.
Okay, so fair enough. Not all economists. Never meant all of them. But what I meant to say is the ones who actually mattered when the policy was being decided.
Sure.
And we heard...
the more fashionable ones.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, they were wrong. We were told it was transitory. It was the result of supply chain.
You mean the banks? They would say they're
No, they were not economically trained. There might have been a couple in Treasury. I don't know. But they were wrong. And similarly, and I think this is why you see some unusual picks for these secretaries in these senior level positions. Similarly, there is a loss of faith in healthcare bureaucracies. We were told that the lockdowns were absolutely necessary. I think people have lost faith.
So you are like Michael Gove, who declared famously on British television that the people have had it with experts.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think they have, and I think they have tired of a degree of condescension that comes from DC and the Ivory Tower.
And I thought you were going to say Ivy League.
The Ivy League and the Ivory Tower is in the Ivy Leagues. And we know some of those presidents got defenestrated. So I think Trump can do...
Although, to be fair, Trump went to Wharton and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden didn't go to such important schools or such posh schools.
I read the other day that somebody asked Trump if he'd ever been in a fight. And he said, I'd like to think I fought my way out of Wharton. So
I see.
These are different policies, unusual policies. The jury in the media is not out. They've decided it's bad, but I could have guessed they were.
Which media? Fox News doesn't think it's bad.
No, I'm talking about aside from the Wall Street Journal, and to be fair, the Wall Street Journal, they're free trade. You read the New York Times.
You're talking about New York Times, and you're talking about the Atlantic,
CNN, the Atlantic.
So the left-leaning East Coast media.
Yes,
got it. I see. So the left-leaning East Coast media has declared that as Trump clamps down on immigration and on free trade, there will be inflation and higher interest rates and the death of the firstborn and bubonic plague.
Right.
Excellent.
Pretty much.
Excellent. And you disagree?
I disagree.
You disagree, but you don't go so far as to say that there'll be rivers of milk and honey.
I don't think everything is going to be hunky-dory on day one. I'm sorry to say.
But at the end of 4 years, we will reach the great sunlit uplands.
You know me. I think after 4 years of deregulating, maintaining the current tax environment, I think, if you try to reduce waste within government, and I can tell you, there's a lot of waste in government. I've seen it. If you try to...
Yeah, you were in Pentagon. And
there are a lot of people there, and there were more people than were needed. I've never had a problem with the defense budget, but I think sometimes the bureaucracy ends up tripping over itself. But I think if you have 4 years of that, that's a positive. I do not know whether or not Trump will impose tariffs, whether or not those will endure court review, whether or not they are just a bargaining tool, though I suspect they are to a degree. So it's difficult to say exactly how we end up, but I certainly think those policies will be better than the inflationary, open border, subsidy spending to the hilt that we've seen for the last 4 years.
Excellent. On that note, you have displayed your credentials to serve the Trump administration 2.0.
Wait, you know me a while. I've been pretty consistent about my overall outlook.
Yes, indeed. And therefore, the Trump administration should appoint you as assistant secretary in the Treasury or some... That's a good job.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, you couldn't do worse than the current incumbents. You have a little more knowledge of India than Eric Garcetti, even though he did get the Rhodes Scholarship.
Yeah, I know when I think of those diplomas. Yeah, no, I could definitely do a better job than he has done.
Excellent. Very good. Jolly good. Ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Rupershell, we'll have him back. You got a very good insight into what the new administration could be like when it comes to economic policy. Those of you who are CEOs and running your businesses, hold on tight. It will be a roller coaster, but the roller coaster may not turn out to be fatal. At least we hope so for your case. And we'll be back making sense, not just of America, but indeed of the world, with Christopher Rupershell I'm Atul saying it's bye for now.
Cheers, y'all.